everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, Rob. It's Diana.
And it's me, Jackie.
How's everyone doing tonight? Everyone ready for another full-length episode about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research? You know, like every week when we talk about a topic related to the field with some great research and sometimes, hint, hint, a special guest.
That was so smooth. I'm ready. That was a question.
You are okay. You are ready. That's the answer. Good. I'm glad to hear you are ready. Jackie, you as well. You're also ready.
I'm always ready.
That's awesome. Well, we are very fortunate tonight because we are speaking with another awesome special guest, and that is Dr. Evelyn Gould, who will be talking with us all about acceptance and commitment therapy, especially in these hectic times of COVID pandemic. If you thought you were done listening to episodes about COVID, well, you're not, because this is a great one. Oh, because we will also talk about acceptance and commitment therapy, which you've only done one episode, I think, directly about, talking about parent training. So this is going to be a great way to get into that topic, as well as bring some kind of modern times. Although I think this is a good modern time problem to have because it lets us do some deep soul searching and thinking about maybe new topics. But anyway.
I love that you've titled this episode Act in the Time of COVID, because that just gives it this really nice,
What do we all need? Something to help with mental health and anxiety and inflexibility. It's a perfect time.
It's a very love in the time of cholera feel to it. So I appreciate the reference.
I mean, it was going to be act in the time of cholera, but I didn't know if that was really going to make
We know less about that.
It was, yeah, who knows what that would be like? I don't know. Maybe you do, Evie. But before I go on with my terrible metaphors and terrible episode titles, please introduce yourself to all of our listeners.
Hi, I'm Evelyn, and I would love to not say anymore, but I'll say, this is always the part that trips me up because I go into complete anxiety mode. So I'm going to act myself right now, and I'm going to walk into the discomfort and say, I am a clinician. I'm a BCBAD and also a licensed psychologist. And I work with families I've been working with families for about 2 decades now. A lot of that time, a huge portion of that time was with families of kids with autism and other learning challenges. And I also now work a lot with OCD and anxiety, and I do everything from little babies up to adults in lots of different settings. So my clinical work has been pretty diverse, I suppose. And I do research, I guess. I do some research, and I have feet in both academic and clinical world, but I definitely would describe myself as a clinician primarily, and that's my passion. And so the research that I do is typically applied and treatment evaluation kind of stuff, and writing about humanity and things that matter, and and cat lady, I guess. That would be my introduction of choice. Be like, I'm a cat lady.
Wait a minute, you told us you did research, cat lady.
I'm a dog lady. Just saying.
That's okay. I don't have any hard feelings against dog people.
I don't either against cat people. I don't want to be a cat person, but I'm totally a dog person.
I feel the same.
Yeah.
In reverse.
Like I said in the introduction, we've only really talked about ACT once before on the podcast, and that's not for a lack of interest. I know it's something that I have a huge stack of ACT books, some of which I believe you recommended in a webinar that you did last spring that I have, and I haven't gotten through them yet, but I'm going to. I know I will at some point, but other things have gotten up because I have been fascinated with ACT and its increasing popularity in the world of behavior analysis over the years, and how many more people are just talking about it. It used to be a thing that I don't know about the rest of my co-hosts here, but I had never heard of it maybe 10 years ago. And it just feels like you can't go anywhere without hearing more and more about ACT or ACT-like therapies these days. So we're really excited to have you talk about ACT in general, and then specifically ACT kind of in the now, in the present time. Am I kind of crazy in terms of I just wasn't reading the right stuff in terms of not seeing the popularity of ACT and I wasn't on the bandwagon? Or have you noticed that same sort of trajectory yourself in the past number of years?
No, I think that's right. I think at least within behavior analysis, that's correct. Like I came to it through I was really lucky in my graduate program in Wales. We actually read the original ACT book and were introduced to RFT. So because there were people there, it was in the psychology program, and there were professors there who were also psychologists as well as behavior analysts. And I think there was some crossover there, and they were trying to introduce us to not just autism, but clinical behavior analysis and other precision teaching and a variety of different, ABA kind of settings and populations and all kinds of things. So I think that was pretty unique. So that would have been quite a long time ago. And when I moved to America, I was still very interested in ACT, but yes, there was not very many other people within the ABA world. And I mean, there's a few reasons. I wouldn't need to spend time talking about it, but one of the things is, or one of the facts is that ACT really was developed within the psychotherapy, mainstream psychology realm, and really was focused in how do we address the kinds of problems that adults, specifically not kids or adolescents either, but adults are presenting with when in terms of their suffering when they're coming to treatment, like when they're coming to for mental health help or psychotherapy. So it kind of makes sense that there was not that many people who kind of walk in that realm, right? Most people within our field still are mainly in autism and child adolescent kind of work. And so I think that's part of the reason. Yeah, I don't think there was not that much interest. I had to go to try and learn this stuff. I had to really go out of my comfort zone and reach out to people and kind of do a lot of digging around. Whereas now I don't think you have to do that. And it's particularly in the past 5 years, I think there's been increasing interest. And I think we could also spend time, a whole podcast talking about why that is. But I really feel like people are probably where I was at in a lot of ways. And I came to it because I recognized that there were deficits in my training and my ability to support the families that I was working with, particularly parents, and my love of behavior analysis and radical behaviorism specifically was telling me that I should know what to do, that my science should be able to extend to these parents that were, presenting with a lot of anxiety. Sometimes they were really depressed and they were struggling to commit and participate in their child's program. And they were telling me all of the things that they were struggling with. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know what to do with these people. I don't know what to say or what to do. And if my science is like a comprehensive science of behavior, I should know what to do. Like, this doesn't make sense that I have to refer everybody or say, oh, you mental health practitioner that is not a behavior analyst, you should come in with your mentalistic way of thinking about things and help this person. That didn't work for me. And so I really came to it out of a need to fill a space and give me some tools that I just felt was lacking. I was lacking in. I wonder about whether some of the interest, at least in ACT from behavior analysts now, we're a growing field. And some of that is related to also others feeling like all this wonderful technical stuff that I learned in my program, which is absolutely necessary for progress, right, is really important. But it's not, the technologies that I've learned are not enough. Like, I need more. I'm struggling as a practitioner, and also the people that I'm working with, the parents, the staff, the older clients, whatever, they're also struggling in this way that I don't know how to approach as a behavior analyst.
I would have to imagine similarly that's got to be the way a lot of, I think, behavior analysts are coming to ACT, in the sense of, there's got to be a better way. We can't just keep hearing about people with anxiety or OCD or depression and shrug and say, don't know, it sounds like you have to talk to a therapist who may or may not be using behaviorally minded treatments, even though there's a lot of research to support other but similar types of treatments in that field. And you might just do talk therapy, and then everyone just wonders, why doesn't the problem ever seem to get better? And hearing stories about people who, I've had anxiety, like serious anxiety, so much that I can't go anywhere for 20 years. And I've been in therapy that whole time. And you sort of want to say, well, that doesn't sound like it's working. Why wouldn't you use something, that is research oriented? Or perhaps they are. You don't even know, and just wanting to find that answer. I mean, I think it's why we probably all got into this field, is what's the answer to help people? Is there a solution? Is there something that we can be doing better than what we learned, when we were in graduate school or undergraduate school even.
We always hit up against that problem of not being able to see what's occurring inside the skin. And I think time and again, that's what's taught in graduate programs, right? It's like, it's not that it's not there, but we can't see it. Mm-hmm. And to figure out how we can utilize the technologies that we have and the understanding of learning that we have for behavior that is unobservable is a really important application of this technology. But I also think that before we talk too much, we should make sure we discuss scope of practice as well, right? So, and we got into this, the other episode we did on episode 75 with Dr. Adam Haas, in case anyone out there wanted that info. We ran into the same thing when we had that conversation too. It's like, this is an amazing application of our science, but how does one go about becoming trained to do it?
This is an ongoing conversation, and we're going to have to talk about this for much longer in our field, because people are just sort of delving around in here. And part of the problem is because most of the work in ACT was born out of psychotherapy, which is not what we're doing as behavior analysts, generally speaking. And I think there's a few things that need ironed out that would help us with this. And one is, what is it? What do we even mean by ACT, and what are we doing? And what's the behavior that we're targeting here, or the repertoire that we're targeting? And I guess that would be like a starting place for me, because what people mean by ACT can be different from person to person and from context to context. And I think, I'm thinking like, I actually wasn't thinking about necessarily how am I helping these parents with their anxiety. I was thinking, when going back to like how I came to ACT, or how can I develop treatments that are more effective with somebody who's been going to treatment for 20 years. I was just thinking, this parent, how do I help this parent engage in the treatment effectively and do what they need to do with their kid, which is why I'm there, right? I wasn't trying to change the point of or the role that I had, or trying to change the point of why I was in that person's home. But I was noticing that there was stuff getting in the way. There was other stuff showing up for that parent that was beyond the immediate contingencies that I was observing, that was kind of problematic or getting in the way, or that I needed to think about. So there's this piece, I think, in the scope of practice idea of like, what is your goal and what is your role? Like knowing what is your role, why are you there, what's your job, and not deviating from that, like knowing how to practice within your role and what the goal of treatment is. And what are we talking about here? Are we talking, what's our target with ACT? Like, we're not with ACT trying to get inside someone's head and change their thoughts or work on their thoughts or their feelings. Like, that would be the same as CBT, right? That's not what we do as behavioral analysts. We're not trying to get inside a person and fix their thoughts so they can start behaving differently. That is literally cognitive therapy right there, right? We are about changing context. We're about overt behavior change, and how is this person going to live differently or behave differently? What am I doing here? So I think just conversations need to be had around those two pieces. Like, what do we mean by ACT? What is the target of ACT? And what's our role, ethically speaking, our competence? What is our role? What's our job? What are we there to do? And yeah, those are the things that are showing up for me.
What is ACT? What is the elevator pitch, Evie? Or what I kind of came to a discussion of ACT with you based on kind of the webinar that you had done with Dr. Sandoz last spring was kind of, what is an ACT? Because I sort of thought I knew it from reading a book, like Russ Harris book, ACT Made Simple was the book I read. And I was like, okay, that must be what it is now. So that's all anyone will talk about, right? Because that's usually how it is with books. You read one book and it's only going to cover so much. And then hearing the two of you go back and forth and get into sort of the nitty gritty of like psychological flexibility and talking about, stepping into, I forget exactly the phrasing, stepping into the discomfort. I realized like, oh no, this is so much more than like the hexaflex, which I think a lot of people probably came to if they like looked on Wikipedia for acceptance and commitment therapy. That might be the thing that they saw first. So yes.
It was like the Dunning-Kruger effect in real time for you. Is that what was happening? Like over the course of this webinar? Where you start out thinking you know everything and then you realize you know absolutely
I knew everything? Yeah. I thought I was like, okay, I think I can hang for a little bit. And then it was like, no, this is much more. I need to do more and learn more and do more, which is kind of how we get guests. It's like, I got to learn this. I'll just ask directly and find the answer. So I guess, yeah, let's start with a quick elevator pitch and then maybe talk about what we shouldn't be thinking of when we think about ACT.
I would say for me, ACT is about learning how to use language as intervention and learning to be a really good listener and a useful listener and speaker, I guess. Being able to observe really fine-grained observations of human behavior in the real time, and then using language to manipulate context and get people doing different things, get behavioral variability and new things that you can then reinforce, or get them doing a bunch of new stuff that brings them into contact with new sources of reinforcement and undermines verbal control, particularly aversive control. That's it. And to me, ACT is about targeting psychological flexibility, increasing psychological flexibility. And so it's literally anything that you do that does that is ACT to me. So it's not the hexaflex. It's not a bunch of prescribed metaphors or exercises or specific technologies per se. It's ACT is about increasing psychological flexibility in the service of, obviously, in the service of adaptive behavior, or we would say, values-driven behavior. Flexible behavior, yeah.
I think it both narrows it, but then also kind of broadens what ACT could be. When I first was reading about it, I was thinking a lot about things like, the mindfulness movement as, I guess, is that ACT? Is that part of ACT? Mm-hmm. Or is that simply another way to describe some of the components that may go into the work that would kind of fall under the umbrella of ACT? So can you kind of speak a little bit to that? Is mindfulness part of ACT? Is it a tool? Is it unrelated?
Well, first of all, I want to say, I'm not the ACT police, so I have no interest in going around and saying that is not ACT. You're not doing it. You're doing it.
But I have a whole book of tickets I was going to hand out tomorrow at work, Evie. I was really looking forward to it. So
I want to just be really clear. I'm going to talk about what I think, or what I think of as ACT, and what it is I'm doing when I'm tacting and saying this is ACT. What I'm doing right now. I'm not the ACT police. So you can disagree. People are free to disagree, and that is okay. So for sure, there's plenty of people that will say, yes, mindfulness is part of ACT. And that can look, again, mindfulness means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on their learning histories. So some people will say yes, and other people might say no. I think most people will say it's part of it, but then what people mean by that might be different. So to me, I prefer to talk about now present moment awareness, or awareness training, or noticing. When I'm working with kids, I just call it noticing skills, or observing. And for me, when I'm working on the mindfulness piece of ACT, or the present moment awareness piece of ACT, I'm really just trying to teach them. It's about stimulus control. It's about helping people notice a wider variety, or sensitize them to a wider variety of stimuli in their environment, because that opens up a lot of choice and a lot more variability in responding, possibilities for contacting lots of reinforcement that you didn't notice before, and all the rest of it. So I'm really just trying to get them out from underneath that verbal control and into the immediate direct contingencies, I suppose would be another way to say it, and sensitizing them so they have more options. When you're under aversive control, you're very limited, and your repertoire is just focused around escape or avoidance, right? So you're only noticing the aversive stimulus most of the time. You're not sensitive to everything else that's going on around you. And with mindfulness, what we're trying to do is help get you broaden your repertoire. It's broad, purposeful attention. So it's not just, I guess another thing to say for me is it's not just about discrimination training or training someone to notice more stuff or be sensitive to more stuff. It's also about teaching people to be able to shift their attention around, which I think is really important. So then you can attend to what is most useful in the moment. I know there's a lot of non-behaviorally sounding stuff in there, but that's the gist of it. Other people within the ACT community, though, might talk about mindfulness being part of it as in a more formal mindfulness way. They actually are mindfulness practitioners, having formal training in that, and have formal meditation practices that they engage in and that they teach other people to engage in. But the goal is the same. I think most of the time, no matter kind of what way you're thinking about mindfulness or present moment awareness, you are just talking about attention, paying attention. and observing. That is the skill. And you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about a repertoire that can be taught and reinforced, I guess.
For, us, I mean, we have very, variety of kind of psychological classwork, in the past, but then that wasn't something that we necessarily practice every day. So it's one of those things that, anytime I try to put, I know personally for me, try to put my hat back on to sort of, what would like therapy, or how would I use behavior analysis in therapy? I'm pulling from a lot of different places, and very few of them in the context of, directed practice versus I just read a lot of stuff. So I had to make up my own thoughts as to what that means. So it is always good to have someone come back.
I can kind of give you an example. So like for me in my practice, it would just look like I'm just like trying to help people notice what's the source, the stimulus control, right? Notice what they're responding to, what's controlling their behavior, and really paying attention and getting, that is what I'm doing. So that can look just like, so Jackie, like, what are you noticing right now? What can you hear? What are you thinking?
I like that. Okay, so I am seeing the lights around my sunroom, and it is snowing outside, and I can hear my dog whispering like this behind me because she wants to go for a walk, and my neighbors are walking along their backyard.
Do you notice any thoughts that you're having, or what are you thinking right now?
I was thinking that I'm a bit tired, and that my tea is delicious, and that we're having a nice, lovely chat.
You just literally did the skill. Like, that is the skill, is being able to move your attention around and be like, what am I paying attention to? I'm noticing I'm having this thought about I'm tired. I'm noticing that I'm tired. I'm also noticing my dog making noises. I'm also noticing the light, and I'm also noticing. So that is the skill. Like, that's all it is. Even if you're noticing that you weren't paying attention, that's still noticing. That's still noticing that you weren't paying attention. So you can see how that looks very different from if I asked Jackie, okay, we're going to engage in a 10-minute formal meditation practice. It's shaping the goal. I mean, for me anyway, the goal would be to shape that skill.
That would directly relate to the work towards like psychological flexibility and acknowledging psychological distress. Am I putting the two together in that regard, or are they not related quite like that?
No, they are related. So I guess we should talk about psychological flexibility and kind of what we mean by that. And for me, the psychological part of that 2-word thing is just language processes, right? That's all I'm talking about, like rules, rule deriving, rule following, that kind of thing. So language processes. And then the flexibility part is like the same. So when you think about behavioral variability or behavioral flexibility, like what does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? When a person's flexible or behaving flexibly, like what do you notice about that?
I suppose that they could engage in a variety of repertoires of behavior regardless of the internal or external stimuli that are in their environment, whichever environment it might be. Is sort of what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so they can like generate novel responses, or if for example the contingencies change, right, and something that worked before doesn't work anymore, the context changes, and this pattern of behavior being engaging in doesn't work for you anymore, that you're able to adapt to that, right? Problem solving, there's a lot that's involved in any kind of problem solving, that repertoire, right, and that you can try a bunch of different things in order to get access to reinforcement when the contingencies change, or to figure things out. That's the way I kind of think about it. And so psychological flexibility to me is basically the same thing, but we're talking about, can you respond flexibly psychologically? So in terms of language flexibility, or thought, that we include like thinking within that, right? Thinking is languaging. When you experience distress, so when you experience an aversive private event of some kind, like whether it might be a feeling, physiological sensations, whatever that is for you, that you're able to respond flexibly to it instead of just responding rigidly in terms of that escape or avoidance repertoire, or that you don't keep just doing the same thing over and over when it's not working again, that you're able to maneuver around that experience or that obstacle and do a bunch of other things to kind of that are adaptive in the face of that. you can kind of see how mindfulness would be helpful for that, because mindfulness itself is teaching flexibility, right? It's teaching you to broaden your attention from just being particularly like, I'm noticing I'm having this thought that I'm going to fail at this podcast. I'm going to do a horrible job. And if I just stay stuck attending only to that thought, I'm probably not going to, I'm not going to do a good job. It's going to be very aversive to me. I can feel the anxiety in my body. I'm just going to stumble over my words and just be stuck. So when I'm practicing mindfulness, like right now, I'm trying to broaden my attention beyond just that thought to listen to your voices and to notice what's happening in my body and be able to start doing a bunch of other things that might be more helpful to me than spiraling. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I do want to ask, one of the terms that I often see come up in ACT is the idea of, value-driven action, and certainly is mentioned in the articles. Which, now that I think about it, we need to introduce those. Let's introduce those in a minute. I think this is a good introduction, because it's no good talking about articles if we don't have our context. But when you're working with other individuals on ACT, when you're working to improve their psychological flexibility, is it so that they can act towards those values, or is that not necessarily a term that you use in your own practice or focus on in your practice?
So it depends, because sometimes I will talk specifically, I will use the word values or valuing, or other times I won't use any active words whatsoever. Values are extremely, extremely powerful motivators. When I have somebody in front of me that's having a really hard time, and I'm inevitably, the treatment or behavioral intervention is going to be hard, right? Change, discomfort always precedes change, or challenge always precedes change, whatever way you want to think about it. But I'm going to be asking them to do some really hard stuff, right? It's hard to, we are creatures of familiarity. We hate ambiguity. We'll do all kinds of things to avoid uncertainty. And that, we see that in animal studies as well as human studies. And so I'm going to be asking them to do things that are hard. And in order to get them to do that, I need to bring something into the room that's really, really powerful, right? Some kind of appetitive that's going to motivate them to try a bunch of different things and behave differently in response to something that's pretty aversive and hard. I can't always do that with like M&Ms, right? We know this. And often when the people that I work with are really, really struggling, and there's very little reinforcement available to them in that space that they're in, or the schedules are like very, very thin anyway, if not absent. And I, as a practitioner, it's like hard for me to deliver an immediate reinforcer. I mean, I guess sometimes chocolate might work or something like that, but generally I'm not doing that, or it's not going to be enough. And so to me, values are a way of using language to bring these really powerful motivators into the room that can help people understand why. It's like people's why, isn't it? It's like, why should I do this really hard thing? If I can't figure out what that is, then I'm going to have a really hard time moving people. So from whether this is parents that I'm working with, and I do a lot of work with parents, whether it's the kids that I work with or the young people that I work with or the adults that I work with, from the beginning, I'm listening really carefully for what is the thing? What is it that they really care about? And how do I capture that and bring it into the room using my words to help them do stuff that's hard? I think something that really trips people up as well, and I think this was something we'd maybe mentioned in the questions earlier, but is that values, people get, especially even behavior analysts. So behavior analysts, we should know better because we're all about function, right? That's the whole basis of our science is built around this idea of function versus topography. And yet I see even behavior analysts getting really stuck on the topography of what people are saying, right? The words that come out of people's mouths are the words that write down. So when they see someone saying something that looks like a value, they assume that that is a value, even though I would say, well, that just because somebody says that sounds like a value, I'm looking at, is this actually functioning like a value? It's just the same thing as like, we don't just assume a reinforcer is a reinforcer based off what it looks like, right? We try it out, we see, we care about whether it's actually functioning that we can't call it a reinforcer, and it actually functions as a reinforcer. So it's the same with values, is that I'm looking for the quality or the function in terms of like how it's working, how it works to decide if this is a value or not.
Kind of reminds me of like a comedy movie where everyone is clearly, out for their own self-interest, but they're maybe working for like a philanthropy group, and they keep saying some sort of, phrasing like, oh, we're doing this, for the children. We're going to do this for the children, but they're clearly all doing it for different reasons. So, the difference between actually taking them at what they're saying at that face value versus what is the actual function, what is the actual goal in life or in this movie or this scene? I
guess this is like the heart of ACT for me, is teaching me how to look beyond the topography of words and be like, well, what is actually happening? I need to observe more than just the words. And valuing is piece of that. Values are with your feet. We say values are with your feet, right? I'm looking at like, okay, this person is saying, I care about school, right? I care about school. But what I'm noticing is that maybe that the function of that is actually it's not an augmental. It's like something else going on there. Maybe it's pliance, right? They're saying it because that's what they're supposed to say. And they have a history of being reinforced for saying the right thing or pleasing adults or whatever.
Now that we've had, I think, a very excellent chance to talk about what ACT is, what it isn't, and what are some of the ways that ACT can be, used as behavior analysts, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to talk about how ACT is possibly more relevant than ever because of some of the challenges. Well, some of the challenges, we're all facing a lot of challenges. So we'll be talking about that and specifically the published articles relating to that confluence of events right after this. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking with Dr. Evelyn Gould about ACT in the time of COVID. But before we continue this conversation, I want to remind all our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. And by listening to this episode, you can earn 1 learning credit. You're going to need to certainly finish listening to the episode and then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/getceus. That's GET-CEUS, and enter in 2 secret code words. The first of which I will give you right now. It's carrot, CARROT. It's a vegetable, a root vegetable. You find it in the ground. Rabbits love it. And humans too. Carrot. Do you all like carrots? Are you carrot fans?
Absolutely.
I like carrots, but I also, every time I think of carrots, I think of the time when Gilbert Blythe and Anne of Green Gables called her Carrot in the schoolhouse. And then she hit her slate over his head.
I read those books in Ireland.
Me too. They're so good.
Mm-hmm.
I only saw the TV show. The TV movie versions.
Don't worry,
They're
Rob.
pretty good. They're pretty good.
They're very good. When we can be back in person, Rob, I have all of them. Don't worry.
Oh, boy.
No, we can take a 13 to 15 hour day and just watch all of them.
I was a big fan of Avonlea, the show. We're getting way off topic. But it's not an episode of ABA Inside Track if we don't talk about
it's
Canadian
not totally off
broadcasting.
topic. Not totally off topic, because I don't know if you remember this part, but she says a very acty thing. She says, "The sun will keep on rising and shining, whether I fail at geometry or not."
Right.
And I think about that all the time, because I love that idea of just like, it just does not matter. Or, hard stuff happens. and the world keeps moving forward. And I don't know, it's quite acty.
Okay.
Nice.
But anyway, carrot. That's what we were talking about. So now that we have gone through a very thorough and excellent introduction, let me introduce the articles that we'll be discussing, which I think will be great further exemplars of sort of what ACT is and how it is relevant in these times. And those articles are An Invitation to Act on the Value of Self-Care, Being a Whole Person in All That You Do by Feibig, Gould, Ming, and Watson from Behavior Analysis and Practice, 2020. CJ, you thought I wasn't going to say it anymore, but I still will.
I'm so glad. I've missed it.
First things first, Parent Psychological Flexibility and Self-Compassion During COVID-19 by Coyne, Gould, Grimaldi, Wilson, Baffuto, and Biglan, also from Behavior Analysis and Practice, 2020. And Humble Behaviorism by Nuringer from the Behavior Analyst, 1991.
Yep.
I have to be honest, Evie, in reading these articles, it did feel a little bit like that old game from Sesame Street. Which one of these is not like the other?
And yet similar.
Yes.
That's true. That's true. I think there's something about reading early 90s behavior analytic papers that I always have to like put myself into a very different mindset than when I'm sort of reading the more modern work. I don't know if it's just my age or sort of where I would have. Well, I wouldn't have been reading that one at the time because I was not old enough to read Nuringer's work in 1991.
And it's a behavior analyst publication, so you know you got to strap in.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Hold
You're
on.
going down a theory road.
So I guess a good question to start with, or well, I hope it's a good question to start with, but I'm going to ask it regardless, is what was sort of the genesis of these two articles? You and fellow ACT practitioners were, like the rest of us, just saying, man, 2020, yikes, what a mess. We should totally be thinking about all the work that we're doing and some of the patterns we might be seeing and write a little bit more about it, sort of bring some of the principles of ACT to a different audience? Or was it completely something else that sort of sparked, the development of these articles?
The content of the articles is not new. It's something that this is the work that me and my colleagues are doing all day, every day to some extent. But for sure, I can talk about the self-care article first. And that is, me and my colleagues who wrote that paper together, we talk about this topic a lot. We provide peer support to each other a lot. But we felt like a few things that we were noticing. So for me, I was noticing when COVID, everything, I was going to swear there, but when everything went south.
It's okay. Not a lot of children listen to this show.
What I noticed was we had a lot of efforts to support practitioners in terms of, I've seen articles like, how do you move your practice onto online? Like, how do we do that? How do we keep doing what we're doing in this different way, in this context that we're in now? How do you, what are the ethics of that? Like papers that were helping people navigate the ethics of doing telemedicine and so on. And what was missing for me was, what about the practitioner? So this is awesome. We have this article that says, here's how to do parent training over telehealth. But I was not seeing anything around, here's how to cope with the stress of this massive contextual shift that's happened. And here's how to keep showing up when the families that you're working with are also just struggling so much in so many different ways. And I was seeing that outside of behavior analysis. So I have my foot in the psychology world. So I was immediately seeing articles and free webinars, articles about self-care, burnout, tools for practitioners, peer group supports, like all of these resources being thrown, even like places where you could sign up to provide free like support as a psychologist for other people in the front lines, supporting other people. So just a lot of help and recognition around how hard this is to help others in this kind of context, and put your own oxygen mask on first, like how people, a lot of help there, but not inside behavior analysis. So I think part of our push to get this out fast was to be like, we need to offer something to the practitioners for themselves that is not necessarily about what they're doing with their clients, but it's going to help them put their oxygen mask on first in order to be able to keep helping. And I think we also observed this phenomenon, at least I certainly was in Syria, and I for sure talked about this at some point. It's ringing a bell in my head about feeling like practitioners were also trying to force a square peg into a round hole, like that they were really literally trying, thinking that they had to keep doing exactly the same thing that they've been doing before in this really different context, and they're not being a lot of like self-compassion and self-care around like, I'm doing the best I can and I can't do things the exact same way as I was doing them before because it's literally a completely different situation. So I think those are the main reasons for that article. And then the parent one as well, myself and my colleagues felt that there was some good stuff coming out about here's how to do parent training on telehealth, here's some tools for parents, here's how to get your kids to get online. To us, it felt like this is like more to-dos. All of this stuff that's coming out is just like, here, parent, have some more stuff that you should be doing. And here, have some more stuff that's telling you that you're not doing stuff right. And not a lot of like stepping back and helping parents like navigate the high level of distress and just pressure and burnout that comes whenever you're faced with all this uncertainty and this just like constant state of crisis people were feeling, and like collision of roles we talked about in the article, where parents are suddenly like, now they're teachers as well, and they're also parents, and they're managing all of this stuff, and they have all these decisions to make about, you know, work and contamination and all this other stuff that they don't normally have to think about. And yeah, so the article really came out of that place. I mean, I have feelings about the first things first part title, because I think obviously first things first is basic needs. And a lot of families, like, I'm not going to walk into a home where they need help with meeting basic needs like safety and shelter and food and things like that. In a lot of families, that's what's needed. It would be not okay for me to walk in and be like, let's practice self-compassion right now while you're not safe. The reason we said first things first was really just like, we need to slow down before we ask parents to do more stuff. Like they have a to-do list that is off the charts right now, and we need to buffer. We also were like anticipating to buffer just the fallout from all of this struggling, all of this stuff that's going on. And we were kind of like thinking about, I mean, not only seeing, so like, I guess I could say, like I said, I work with parents a lot. And on a given normal year pre-COVID, or week, I could say week pre-COVID, I carry a certain level of really hard emotions and things that my parents are experiencing. And some of that, there's like a percentage of that is like kind of hopelessness or really deep grief or fear about the future, stuckness and uncertainty, and like some really painful stuff. And then I noticed in COVID, that percentage has just got so much bigger. Like the families that I'm working with are now just struggling so much more. We were noticing that shift in the amount of pain and difficulty that we were carrying as practitioners and trying to help our families with. And then anticipating, like thinking, we need to do something now. We can't wait for this to get worse. And it's only like, what's this going to be like after this pandemic and the fallout of that? And like, we need to, going back to that oxygen mask metaphor again, but like, we need to do something to help these parents. We need to do something now that's going to help them, help their kids, and help move them through this endless uncertainty. And there's actually some research, I was just reading an article earlier today that came out like last week or something on psychological flexibility in parents and COVID, and just the showing that inflexibility and just lack of skills, I guess, in coping results in a lot more. I mean, I'm sure you already have seen the statistics on domestic violence, but things like just coercive parenting practices. So the increased stress of the pandemic predicts like more coercive parenting and inconsistent parenting and conflict between partners and things like that. But that also is worse if you're psychologically inflexible. So they noticed that if you're with parents who are more psychologically flexible, are more likely to ride or surf the stress better, but also it predicts more reinforcement-based parenting, like more consistent parenting as well, and less conflict and so on. So I guess that's all of, I mean, I didn't have that research in front of me whenever we were doing this, but we suspected that based off, everything that we see in our practice every day. So yeah, I guess that was kind of a long-winded answer.
One thing that I really love about both of these articles is your use of common language in the articles. I particularly loved the hashtags in the articles. I'm not usually a hashtagger myself. I'm not very well versed in the hashtagging lifestyle, but I did find it useful, and I love that you use them. Can you kind of explain like where that came from and if you've noticed it's helping at all?
Really quick answer for that, and that was Kelly Wilson. So Kelly Wilson was the one who came up with the hashtag idea, and I have to say that we toned the hashtags down because I had I was struggling with feeling okay about hashtags being in a behavior analysis paper, and I was like, I just don't know about the hashtags. It feels like a little cheesy, and I also got caught up in my thoughts about, well, is our hashtags going to feel coercive to some people? Like, look at me, hashtag meaning matters. And then I'm going to be like, oh, I guess I'm not doing a good enough job at hashtag meaning matters. But Kelly is a very wise person and knows a thing. So we kept the hashtags, and I'm not surprised by what you just said, because we've had other people have also told me directly, and my colleagues, that they thought the hashtags were actually very helpful. They liked them a lot. So the rationale for them obviously is that common language and this idea that Kelly had around kind of pro-social sharing, community building. And could we build community through some of these social media sharing means, which I'm not that savvy about. So
the idea is that you would then look up the hashtag if you wanted to know more.
I mean, I don't want to speak for Kelly or like I even know anything about social media stuff like this, but I think the idea was just to, I'm not sure if maybe it was a literal, like you could take these hashtags and share in your community, or it was just sort of highlighting or simplifying kind of these ideas, I guess, both maybe.
When I was reading the article, I read it as we can use them to share across our community and say, like, these things matter. This is what I'm doing to help myself. This is how I'm trying to take care of myself, and saying it's okay to take care of myself. And I'm using these hashtags to then promote the self-care that we all need.
Yes, I think Kelly would agree with that.
Hey, Kelly.
Right, because you have to develop a common language in order to be able to talk about these things together. So then if you can hashtag meaning matters, then other people who are like-minded are going to find it and do the same. And like you said, build that community online if one knows how to hashtag, which I don't really do.
So Evie, in terms of kind of some of the work with families, when we're trying to meet families where they are, as you say in the articles, as members of a compassionate science, we want to help families in these times of crisis recognize that they need to take some time for themselves or practice some amount of self-care. But like you yourself said, and it makes perfect sense, if we say, hey, mom and dad, I know you got a lot of stressors right now. Take a minute for yourself. You're going to get kicked out of the house. Who are you? But you sort of mentioned a lot of other ways that I think we can more subtly, influence isn't the right term because that sounds very weirdly nefarious, but ways that we can either self-model self-care or bring up self-care in a way that's not, hey, you know what else you should do in addition to everything else? Be good to yourself too. Put that on the bottom. But that's zeta at the bottom of your list of
right.
A million things.
Because if I'm stressed out, that's like the last thing I want to hear.
Hey, take a breath and calm down.
Right? Like, when am I supposed to have time to do that? I have all these other things I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of the ways that you came up with or wrote about, how would you do this in a way that's not going to just be told like, I'm not paying you to give me therapy and I didn't ask you for your help and I don't have time for this. So thanks for nothing kind of response.
Well, there's a few things that are showing up for me. And one of them is how important it is for practitioners to be walking the walk. And I would ask, when you are saying to a parent, oh, you should take a breath and just relax, what's the function of that? Is that about you trying to fix the parent or trying to make yourself feel better because it feels uncomfortable? You want to make their emotion go away. You want to make it better. What's the function of that? It's not necessarily to help the parent engage in self-care. So I think that is so important. Like, there is no rule. There's no rigid rule about what does self-care mean? What is that? What is it? How do you do it? I'm not walking in and telling parents what to do. I'm listening really carefully to what's going on for them and making space for whatever's happening and not trying to fix it or make it go away, because you can't. Like, you can't make the pandemic go away. I wish so much we could wave a wand and be like, hey, all your stressors are gone. But thinking about, if I notice, like, I'm doing an assessment essentially, because I'm not going in and being like, what is this parent struggling with and how can I help them? Or do they even need my help? Like, maybe the parent doesn't even need help. They're managing the best they can and they're suffering, but the suffering isn't necessarily, like, that's there, but are they still doing everything that they need to be doing? Are they asking for my help right now? So I want to assess, like, is there a need for building self-care skills? Probably, because almost every person on the planet, especially parents, struggle with that, right? How I go about trying to help them with that is going to look really different depending on the parent and where they're at in terms of their skills and their context. So it could just be, and I'm thinking about, like, well, what is it I'm trying to do? What I want to do most of the time is, this parent is only experiencing hard stuff. What do I want to do? I want them to contact more reinforcement. I want to figure out a way to create some more reinforcement throughout their day. How am I going to do that? It's not going to be like, oh, if you work on this behavior plan for the next month, things will be better. That's not going to be helpful. I want to think about, like, how can I, and I don't want to add to their to-do list, you're right. So I'm not going to be like, go do yoga every day for the next week. That's probably not going to happen. I can, one, model these skills for the parent, like, show them, like, this is really hard and I'm just making space for that. Like, I'm not going to try and fix it. I'm just going to sit. I'm just going to be present with you. Sometimes just being present with people is enough. How am I taking care of myself? Am I setting boundaries? Am I being kind to myself when I'm feeling pain? Like, can I model that for them and they're going to feel that? Is this parent a math problem or a sunset? That's a Kelly Wilson thing, right? You can approach every single problem like that. Is it either as a math problem and a problem to be solved, or is it a sunset to be appreciated? Like, how am I showing up to my struggles? There's different ways to struggle with stuff. You can fight and struggle in very harsh and punishing ways, or you can be kind and compassionate with your pain and with the stuff that you're struggling with. So I definitely want to model all of these skills. And then, think about, what's the smallest thing that I could do for this parent that would just add even just one moment of care and space and shape, and then shape from there. And it might just literally be a noticing skill. Like, can you notice what you're feeling and tell me and name it? Maybe that's it to begin with. Maybe it's just allowing the parent space to say what they're feeling. Maybe it's, one of my personal favorites is just trying to help parents start to notice really small sweet spots in the day, right? That could add, like, if you start noticing just, I love coffee. So I'm a coffee person. So I just love the smell of coffee. Just taking a second to just smell the coffee, taste it. Like, that's just 2 seconds right there. Can I notice the softness or the smell of my kid's hair? Like, that's a moment that's really reinforcing. Can I notice the smile of my kid's laugh, or my kid, something my kid does that's funny, or the cat, stroking the cat's really nice. And, like, when you add, like, those tiny moments, that can add up to a lot of more reinforcement in your day than was there before. And that's part of the noticing skill in ACT, mindful attention. And that's a tiny thing that doesn't require any more effort, right? That's just, I'm doing my things and I'm just paying attention. I think the things that are important are practitioners being aware, for sure, of the function of their own behavior. Like, why am I doing this or saying this right now? Is this about parent or is this about me? And meeting parents where they're at in terms of not trying to force them to be somewhere where they're not at, and allowing space for it to be hard. And then helping them, you modeling compassion for them, modeling the skills yourself will be helpful. And then trying to figure out, what's the smallest piece? What's the smallest step that I can help this parent with? And not doing it in like another thing that they have to do, or in an agenda way, and then I'm trying to fix you kind of way. And then there's the values piece too, like really trying to help parents notice that valuing is a way of being, that it's something that you're doing, and that you can make every moment about something that is important. That does not mean that the hard stuff goes away. So I think, Jackie, one of the questions that you had posed was something about, are we asking people to ignore adversity or turn away from adversity? We're absolutely not doing that. That would be like the opposite of ACT. and if we could just ignore adversity, why would we even be having this conversation? Everybody would just be ignoring their problems and merrily moving along their way.
Wait, that doesn't work? Oh, jeez.
Well, the thing is, it does work a little bit, which is why people get stuck on it. Because in the short term, you can usually find a way to ignore stuff, but it doesn't typically work in the long run. And we usually end up doing a bunch of destructive stuff in the process of trying to avoid. So with parents, like I want to make sure that we're being clear. Maybe we didn't do a good job of that in the article, which is totally fair. But to be clear that we're saying, yes, there's adversity there, and not you have to make that go away in order to move forward, or you have to ignore that and move forward. It's like adversity can be there, and there can be more than adversity. It's about like, actually, a parent, this is a wee story about a parent that on Friday I was meeting with a family, and the parent was saying to me that she had talked to a mentor about this metaphor, and she was using it to describe like they have a child who's 10, I think 10 or 11 or so, and really they've just been going through the hardest time during this pandemic. It's really, really hard for them. And she was saying, like, I realized it's kind of like you've got these different jars, and you've got this ball that's like all your pain and the chronic challenges and all the worries I have about my kid, and is my kid going to end up in jail or dead, or how's this going to work out for my kid, and are things going to get better, and a lot of trauma and like all this stuff. It's not about trying to make the ball smaller in that jar. It's about trying to get a bigger jar, and really just making life bigger around the ball. And the ball stays the same size, but it doesn't rule everything anymore. So the adversity doesn't go away, if that makes sense. It's about making your life bigger.
I really like that, how you characterize that too, because when I read the article with parents, I instantly thought, like, how am I going to do this under my strict guidelines of insurance funding and insurance mandates and school pressures? But if it's me modeling, right, empathy and compassion and being aware in the moment, then I think that most certainly can tie into, while I'm working with a parent and working with a client, and bringing that into all of the moments that we're working together. And so I really love that, because the first time I read it, I'm not going to lie, I was like, oh no, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to do this.
I read it the same way, Jackie, it's right. Okay, step 2 on my agenda is be there for the parent for 5 minutes and make sure they understand that I care about you and I'm here to help. And then I got to move on. I did not think about it in terms of how it's something that you could continue to model. It was, it's the math problem, not the appreciation of the sunset. Is sort of fortunate. I think a lot of folks, I don't want to speak for everyone. That's how I approach even an article that is clearly trying to have me think in a different way. It's like, okay, so this is one more tool I can use to help people or solve people more so than actually help people.
That's just so hard. It's behavior analysts are wired to be problem solvers and rule followers. I really understand that. And it shows up in all of the trainings that I ever do and all of the presentations. It's like, well, just give me the rule. Like, just tell me what is the rule and I will follow it. How do I do this? What is ACT? When is this? What is in my scope? Tell me the rule. And of course, like, it's not about that. It's like, I don't want to do that. ACT is all about teaching tracking, which is contextually sensitive rule following, where you're adjusting what you're doing depending on the situation. So but I get it, because we kind of are shaped to be that way, and it's hard. It's really uncomfortable for people. But I guess I want to just kind of piggyback on what you just said, just thinking about if you just did the one thing of showing up to a parent's house and thinking of seeing them as a sunset to be appreciated in all of that they're going through, instead of arriving like thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do about this parent? I got to fix this. I got to make this better. I got to make this go away. And I got to get this parent to do this, and seeing them as a math problem to be solved. Like, how might that feel? Like, think about yourself, like how would it feel for you to have somebody come to your door and see you as something to be fixed, as opposed to coming and seeing you as a sunset or something to be appreciated? Like what that feels like. Just that. Like you can do that as a practitioner.
One of my past jobs, I worked with families of really newly diagnosed kids. And that was something I would talk to my teachers, my staff about too, is this is such a intense point in time for these families, right? And they are not going to remember everything that's going on right now because they're in such a high level of stress. They may not remember us. They may not remember all of our names, but they're going to remember how we made them feel and whether they felt like we were helping them through this. And that's all that we should be there for right now. Like this is a long journey.
100%. 100%. I couldn't agree more. And it's not our job to fix everything. Like something I've really learned through this journey is as I've got better at showing up from this ACT stance, like practicing all this stuff myself and showing up in a very different way to parents and listening better and really being present and paying attention to what they care about and getting on the same page. Like what I've noticed is I do a lot less training of parents and I really I just don't have to, because it's often not a can't do. Parents actually do know how to parent their kids. When they are provided, or when you create the context for that, they can notice. They are not they get it. They're like, yeah, my kid is screaming because I won't give him this. I probably shouldn't give it to him. Like they get that. It's just all of this other stuff can get in the way, and they have a hard time being effective. But when I show up in this ACT way and just listen and do all this good stuff, this therapeutic alliance kind of stuff, and really pay attention, they can do it. I don't have to do BST and teach them about reinforcement and all this didactic stuff I used to do about DRA and eggplant ignoring and all this stuff. I don't have to do that. I don't have to give them a behavior plan. It doesn't mean that I don't ever make suggestions or guide them. I do, but I don't have to do all that heavy lifting anymore. And the funny part is also just that I get so much better compliance. Like the parents start parenting much more effectively and they are able to do it. Like they're so resilient and they really, really do know how to do this with help, with the support. It's been a really interesting journey from that perspective, because I definitely came from a traditional EIBI space of doing a workshop with parents and all these slides and then handouts and practicing and doing all of that stuff, and I don't do any of that now, and I get way better compliance. So yeah, it's interesting.
I know. I think we all sort of we'll probably spend most of the time talking about how can we help parents, but I'm hearing you describe so many of the themes in the articles. And I'm wondering if the bigger problem is not how we're helping parents, but how we're helping ourselves recognize our own patterns of behavior that may be making situations that could be easier or harder, or ways that we're inadvertently focusing on the reinforcers that are important to us, which is inherently going to worsen our relationship and our ability to model self-care and model some of these important behaviors to parents and to the other individuals that we work with. I'm sort of feeling oh no, I'm broken. What's wrong here? Because I know, you're talking in the articles about common components of humanity and appreciating common components of humanity. And, some of the wording in terms of, asking people how they're doing. And I couldn't help thinking of Joey from Friends, that when I ask people how they're doing, I feel like it's kind of hey, how you doing? There's no way anyone thinks I care. There's no way I'm saying this genuinely, because they must know deep down, like parents, they know what to do. I think I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And sometimes I feel like I'm phoning this in. I can't have that genuine compassion. Everything's a problem. I have to solve the problem, and I need to get out of that pattern. So I did appreciate the article that you wrote for the practitioner of give yourself a break, because I know every time I try to kind of follow these steps, it feels like that's all I'm doing is I've got my recipe for making friends with the people I work with and making them feel good. And part of me saying, you don't know what you're talking about. It's the topography of words. your function is trying to make yourself feel better in the moment. So I don't even know if it's a good question now that I asked, like, what are some tips you should give me? Because that, again, I think is missing the point.
I think, yes. I think you...
Sorry, I didn't bring you on to give me therapy, but I guess that's what I'm asking you to do.
I'm going to give you some tips. There's a few things that are showing up for me. One is we are so used to being the experts, and we need to notice that and realize then when we try to do stuff that is different, it's going to feel really uncomfortable and we're not going to like it because all these thoughts are going to show up like you just described, like this feels weird. This is not me. I don't know. It doesn't feel good, but nothing, that is the part of learning. Like there's no way to fast track to being good at something without going through that process of feeling uncomfortable or having thoughts about like, I'm going to say this and this parent's going to be like, what the F? And being willing to try it anyway, and being willing to notice, the first time that you walk in and say to a parent, if you're not used to doing that and they're not used to hearing you say that, and you walk in and you say, how are you doing this week? They might be like, what? And you might feel weird. That's okay. That is okay. Just because it feels uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong. It can mean that change is going to happen. It can mean that you're learning. That's okay. Like making space. So first of all, making space for just feeling like this is weird. And I don't know if I'm doing this right. That's okay. That's part of the process. And you're going to get it wrong. That's also part of the process. And you're going to feel like you're fumbling around and stumbling, and you might get a parent that's like, what on earth? I don't like that. That's okay. And I still feel like that sometimes when I'm working, especially when I work with new clients, I'm still get that feeling of like, this sounds stupid, or this doesn't feel right. And then the other part that showed up for me when you're talking there was just this thought of like, why not just name that model the skills right there? You can say to your staff, like, I'm just having the thought right now that I have no idea what to say. And I really care. And it's because we're trying to learn ways of like helping everyone, because it's a really hard time right now and it's hard, and I'm committed to doing it. Like just modeling, like I'm noticing I'm having the thought, that allows your staff to be like, oh, what am I thinking? Oh, I'm noticing I'm thinking that too. And then they're learning how to be more mindful, right? So that is doing ACT. You are doing it. You're doing the thing. Yeah. So I think allowing yourself time to start trying on new ideas and new skills and new things is you make space for, and you'll find your own way of doing it. That's the other thing, like be contextually sensitive. Like the whole point of this is to be contextually sensitive. There is no rules about the topography of what I have to say in a specific parenting meeting. Like that's not there. It's the function that matters. So how I get there can look lots of different ways, and you'll find your way because you're a different person with a different learning history from me. So the way that I describe things in this article or the examples I give might not resonate for you. You might want to use different words, or you might want to say things in a slightly different way. It also depends on the parent and the situation and the relationship that you have with the person and so on. So you got to just try stuff on and then tweak and then notice how they work. Like that's the process. Be a behavior analyst, experiment and see what works, and then don't keep doing things that aren't working and keep doing things that are working. And also noticing, like even with extinction bursts, right, we know that lots of other random stuff and it gets worse before it gets better. And it doesn't mean that the procedure is broken.
I would think a lot of the same kind of ideas that we've been discussing in terms of working with parents would be true for us as practitioners, in terms of dealing with everything that's going on and accepting some of the, the thoughts about like, certainly telehealth. I mean, I can't imagine anyone was like, oh, great, telehealth. I'm a pro at telehealth. So I'm going to ride this pandemic out like a champ, like most people. I'm sure our first thought was, I don't know how to do this new thing. What if I can't do this new thing? I'm not going to be able to do this new thing. I hate this new thing that I'm doing. I can only do so many webinars and read so many articles about it before I need to actually do it myself. And it's scary. And maybe this isn't the field for me anymore. Or maybe this pandemic has made me realize I need to do something different with my practice, right? It's that same, giving it space, and then
you're spiraling.
I'm spiraling.
Absolutely. I think working on yourself is the most important thing, because if you just do that, like think of the impact, because you are the context for the parent. When you're standing with them and you're talking to them, you are the context. Therefore, you are the point of change. You're not going to try and get inside that parent and fix anything. So I think if you just change your skill set and your ability to notice the function of your own behavior and use your words in a way that's skillful, given the context, then you're going to really impact the people that you work with, including other practitioners. One thing I know, I don't want to leave this as kind of random to throw it in there, but one thing I really want to emphasize with ACT is it is not, again, about making the hard stuff go away or better, right? Just because you still feel rubbish doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. The whole point of ACT is actually to make your life bigger, like we talked about. Right. So I get a lot of people writing to me and saying, I've been doing all this ACT stuff and I'm in this really hard situation with work and I've been practicing acceptance. I'm trying to do this meditation, I'm trying to do this and this and this, and I still feel overwhelmed and I can't like it. And I'm like, okay, but the point of acceptance, for example, is not to feel better. It's okay if you don't feel better. Like, this is not the goal, isn't to feel better. But what are you doing differently? Are you doing the things that matter to you? Are you focusing on making your life bigger or getting that jar bigger around that hard stuff? That is kind of the measure. Are you being more flexible? Are you doing more different things in the presence of that hard stuff? So I think really paying attention to that, like asking yourself, like, am I running away from something? Am I trying to make this better and make it go away? Is all my energy going into struggling with this stuff? Or am I allowing that to be there and then trying to figure out, what could I do differently? Because I've probably been struggling with, I've been struggling with a pandemic. I personally have been struggling with a pandemic, obviously, like everybody else. And it's not a worthwhile use of my time. Then I'm just kind of hitting my head against a brick wall if I just keep doing the same things over and over and trying to feel better and trying to feel better. It's probably time to try something else. That just seemed important to say, I guess, because when you're talking there about the criticism and like trying to figure this out, and I just was thinking like, well, the goal is not to feel better or great. Sometimes in the process that will happen. And most times actually in the process it will happen when you start doing other things. It's like I mentioned, you're going to come into contact with new sources of reinforcement and new stuff starts to happen. But it's not where we're putting our energy per se.
We're moving into talking about self-care too. We talked with Shane Spiker about self-care and he said some similar things, which was self-care isn't just about doing the things that you want to do, right? Sometimes it's about doing the hard things that you need to do so that you can move past them and get yourself back to a place where you can be comfortable and not trying to claw your way out of your own body.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's like you're operating with respect to a longer term goal or a longer, later, bigger reinforcer rather than just the immediate, like, I got to get out of here. Because that immediate, like, I need to feel better, I got to get out of here, almost certainly points to inflexibility and aversive control and very narrow repertoires of behavior. And I really like that a lot. I liked that episode too.
Oh, thank you. I think you make a great point, though, Evie, in terms of the thought of any sort of therapy, or whether it's self-care or I'm using ACT. And I don't know if this is, I'm just going to speak very specifically to someone who's, grown up in New England. If I'm getting help for, whether I'm feeling overwhelmed or whether I feel like I'm psychologically inflexible, whatever the reason, I'm thinking about it like a goal. I'm going to go see you. You're going to give me my tips. I'm going to use those tips and then I'm going to be better and I'll be fine forever after that. And I think one of the reasons that I know I find ACT to be, what I've read in it so fascinating compared to so many of the other kind of types of either, behavior therapy that are out there, is that it's not that focus on that you're going to continue to see adversity. It's not like you'll get the solution from me, the therapist, and then you'll go out and the problem will never come up again. So much as how are you going to be able to respond to situations in the future, acknowledging that you're not escaping adversity, like you said. Is the pandemic sort of the kind of environmental sea change for people where that is now something that, we may be more willing to hear than we were in the past, when maybe we weren't thinking about, our values were more about, more lofty goals than just getting through the next month or being stuck at home and not having, not kind of quote unquote, losing our minds by being stuck there?
It's a really interesting question. And one of the thoughts I had was, I guess in a way, I could see that being probable for, at least for privileged white people who haven't had to deal with that level, with the level of uncertainty and difficulty that the pandemic brings before, right? So we can, if you're pretty comfortable generally and you're doing okay and you're privileged, you can quite easily pretend that there is no uncertainty, and you can do a bunch of stuff to make yourself feel like you're in control and that there, you know, you can kind of get that certainty, and you aren't really being faced with as much adversity as other populations are constantly being faced with. So I could see, you know, when we're the people, white people with the money and ability to, you know, we're more represented in academia and whatnot. So I could see that being the case from that perspective. That's the first thing that I thought there, that there's a lot more people struggling with, oh, my strategies don't actually work. I've been like doing all the things I normally do when I'm having a hard time, and here we are 6 months later, and I'm still in the uncertainty, and it's really hard, and I'm having to do all of these things that I don't normally have to do, or I'm just struggling in this way that I don't normally have to struggle with. So yes, I guess yes is probably, that's probably true, and I'm not sure. I mean, I guess sometimes you do need a real massive kick, don't you, to actually be like, okay, maybe I need to do something different. I don't know if that answers it all, or what you were thinking. What were you thinking about when you asked that question? I'm curious.
I guess that same idea of how easy it has been. And you know, I had to speak personally when I'm talking about things being easy, when things were quote unquote normal before. And in terms of trying to think about my own values and how my values as a practitioner, as a parent, as a partner, as a person in society have shifted, and how I want my values to be still in line with, you know, who I want to be. Is I want to be someone who helps. You know, that's why I'm in the field I'm in, right? As to really thinking about how I want to think about this as not a positive experience, because certainly that I think would devalue how horrible it is, and how, again, yeah, I'm a privileged white person, that it hasn't been as bad for me, certainly, but that I do want to think about what's a positive from this. It's like, well, something happened that really, you know, I was safely at least able to face that. What I typically do didn't work, and how, you know, at least I can take from that, well, then there are other ways to do things, and that's going to be okay. And like you've been saying this whole episode, that doesn't have to feel good. It's not a matter of, well, now I feel great about change, but I can accept that that is a change that is going to happen, and okay, that's fine. And where can I go from here?
Yeah, you're talking about resilience, I think. And I mean, what we know already about these kinds of challenges, or these, you know, adverse events, is that some people, it actually can be very empowering for some people. Some people come out the other end much more resilient, and it can be really positive from that perspective. You know, and we could go on, what do we even mean by resilience, or what do we mean by a positive outcome? That's a whole other conversation. But there are certainly, we know that that's the case. We know that adversity can result in just amazing stuff. And also that's not the case for everybody. So I'm very aware that I think it is going to be great. You know, people are going to learn a lot of skills, and then there's going to be other people who do not come out the other side of this very well. And I'm worried about that population. I think particularly, just, I'm kind of honestly as a practitioner, bracing myself for being overwhelmed. And I certainly am aware, from my perspective, I have not struggled with our wait lists have just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So and I also have witnessed, like, young people, some of the teens I've worked with and some of the parents I've worked with have risen to the challenge and have done great. You know, they're doing great. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. And then others not. So I think we still, I guess one thing I might hope for is that we do more research on, well, what's different about the people that, if we strip away, obviously, socioeconomic advantages and things like that, is there differences in terms of psychological flexibility or things like that do predict how well someone's going to do when they're faced with something like this? The Viktor Frankl quote we had a Viktor Frankl quote in the self-care paper. But that was the whole basis of Viktor Frankl's work, wasn't it? That's just his curiosity about what is it about some of the people in the concentration camp that allows them to continue to be resilient or to thrive in the sense of just being able to get through it and not be crushed by that experience. And he was so curious about that that's what he studied, and that's where, you know, he didn't talk about valuing, but I think when I read his books, that's what I see in there, is the people who were able to connect with those bigger, huge, verbally constructed reinforcers or motivating operations or whatever. We're able to stay connected with that to keep them behaving flexibly and moving through those experiences. That those were the people that did best.
Well, let's go into the dissemination station, because unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up, even though I think this is a topic where I'm just looking at our questions, like we're not going to get through all these questions. There's so many things to talk about here, but in the interest of having our artificial time frame, let's go into our dissemination station. Oh, we're here.
Wow.
So
it took us so little time to get here.
It's amazing how that happens. So, Evie, typically what we do in this section is we'll ask if we have, certainly have a guest, or if we're talking about research, we'll say, like, what's the take-home point? Or, like, what's a big thing for everyone that they could do now? And that feels a bit like anathema to the discussion we've been having. Like, tell everyone out there what they should do differently doesn't really feel like the conversation we've been having in terms of, like, what's the tip that you're going to give everyone? I'm not quite sure how we want to kind of phrase this section of the show this time. Maybe whether it's a kind of a resource or something that one of your own thoughts that maybe you could share for everyone else is kind of modeling that self-care. I'm not quite sure how we would wrap up today. Do you have any thoughts? Putting you on the spot there. I'm sorry.
I would say one tip or one thing I could encourage people to do just moving forward would be just to practice noticing what you're responding to. Particularly when you're, say, in a challenging situation with a parent, like just asking yourself, what am I noticing? Am I noticing what I'm thinking? Am I noticing an emotion? What am I feeling in my body? Like, what am I? Where is the stimulus control right now? Like, what is it that I'm responding to? And what's showing up in that moment? Is there more here than just the immediate contingencies? Is my history showing up here in somewhere? It was just a kind of curiosity, I would say. Try to be curious about what's happening with you. With self-care, I guess, start really small, like with those tiny moments. I think that has been the most impactful thing for me, particularly when I'm feeling burned out and overwhelmed and I can't do the things that I would normally do for self-care. Like I can't go to my gym, or I can't really go running as I used to, and I can't do these things that I used to do. Finding like those tiny moments of pleasure or tiny moments of meaning, or just, noticing the color of something on your wall that you love. I don't know, just tiny things. If you can start there, I think you start to enrich your life. And in any moment you can kind of do that, right? Any moment I can stop and slow down and find something to attend to fully. So yeah, I would start there, I guess. And just to be kind. There's like no perfect way to do this. There just isn't. Everybody's going to have their different ways of moving through these kinds of challenges, and it's okay. Like there's no right way, and we're all going to do it wrong, and we're going to go off track and be like, damn it, I didn't do that thing that Evelyn said. And find another reason to like beat ourselves up, and just let that go. Like that's it. This is hard, and we're all doing it, and everybody will find their way, I guess, of practicing self-care and learning these skills.
All right.
That's good advice.
That is good advice. I personally am a big fan of the like, hey, you know what? It's okay that I feel like I'm screwing up because I'm learning something new. I've gotten much better at saying that to myself, and rather than just like, oh, I screwed up, forget, it's over, I quit, I won't do this anymore,
And look at how much understanding, like to say to yourself, like, I hate the way I feel right now because I'm having the thought that I screwed up. And that means I get it. I get how my parents must feel all the time. I get how my staff probably feel. And that common humanity piece there, and that empathy, like you have the ability then to really understand what other people are going through too.
Well, Evie, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It has been very illuminating. And I think having you discuss many of the points in the articles really, really points out, just at least for me, and I think, Jackie, you were kind of saying you felt the same way, how quick I think we all are to sort of go to old patterns of like, I read an article to find these are the steps to follow, and how much more that there can be in synthesizing and taking in that information and then practicing and modeling it in the future. So I know I'm very happy that we had this opportunity, because it's certainly a case where there was no way I was going to pick up all of this on my own. So having you here to guide me through was amazing.
I want to say, like, can I just say one thing? And
Sure.
that is just, it's okay to follow steps. Like, I'm not saying, like, protocols can be useful, right? It's okay to start there, but the goal is you know, if you're following steps, notice how they're working and shape that flexibility. So you're not going to, you know, you can follow the steps in the article and that's fine. And then just start tweaking and start noticing and tracking and learning the skills beyond the rules and the protocols, I guess. Okay. But it's there's nothing like inherently terrible about steps, you know.
But be aware of the difference between following steps and is this working, or are you okay?
Yeah, and being like applying rules really rigidly, because we definitely, if we know one thing about behavior analysis, we should know about rigid rule following, rule governed behavior.
Oh yes, that's very true. So, Dr. Evelyn Gould, do you have either a contact information if people would like to talk to you more about this topic, or I don't know if maybe you have another like a series of webinars coming out, anything like that people could look at to learn more about ACT?
I would like to just mention a collaborative project of mine with the other authors of the self-care article. Called it Constellations, but our goal is we're actually doing it right now. We're running a self-care workshop training based around the stuff in the article right now. But it's really, our goal is really to create a community of practice for behavior analysts to connect with peers and share and help each other and support each other. And then within that, we're also going to try to offer some trainings and consultation and supervision and all kinds of good stuff. So I would just plug that. Also just because I'm so honored to be doing it with people like Siri Ming and Julia Fiebig and Rebecca Watson. So it's constellations.net, I believe. It's We Are Constellations. weareconstellations.net, I think. And if you want to find out more, you can also email us at constellationsoffice@gmail.com.
Once again, big thanks to Dr. Evelyn Gould for coming on and talking with us about ACT in the time of COVID. Again, just a subject that I know we are all so very, very interested in continuing to learn more about. And I think this was definitely a time where just reading the articles, there's so much there, but then getting a chance to talk more about the content of it is just double the value, I think, in those articles. So thank you again, Dr. Gould. And with that, it brings us to the end of another episode of ABA Inside Track. Before we wrap up, I want to give you that second secret code word. It is lemonade. LEMONADE. Lemonade, please. This is really good lemonade. It's a minor quote, but anyone who can email us where that minor quote came from, it's from a popular show, you will get mega kudos and a shout out on a future episode. So yes, lemonade. We've already said big thanks once again to Dr. Gould. Also thanks to Jackie and Diana. And thank you so much to you for listening. We hope you enjoyed ABA Inside Track. Why not subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. If you're interested, we'd also really, really love to hear from you. There are a lot of ways you can do that. Certainly by leaving us a review on any of your podcast places of choice. You can also find us on social media. We're everywhere as ABA Inside Track, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. You can find these posted on the YouTube page for ABA Inside Track with the YouTube subtitling feature. You can certainly go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to get links to all of the articles discussed in our episodes, as well as to purchase CEs. And if you're interested in ABA Inside Track's episodes and want even more content, well, why not subscribe on our Patreon at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for just $5 a month, you're able to join us for social meetups with us and other behavior analysts. That's every other month, as well as at higher tiers, you can get some access to our extra long book Club podcasts. We, at the time of this release, we should have just finished recording, or it should be coming out pretty soon, our talk on the book Neurotribes by Steve Silberman. So if you'd like some more content, you can find that there at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for his recording of our intro and outro music, to Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, to Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his editing, and Hollis Urban from Sycamore Workshop for his visual design. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!